No. Huh. There we go. There we go. There. Is that good?
Yeah, it looks good from this end, Steve.
Okay. I never know for sure what you're seeing down there.
I'll take a picture and email it to you, and then you can see it.
Okay.
No, you're good.
So today we're going to talk about leaves. Let's see. Lots of vocabulary. We'll see how far we get through this. So what does a leaf do? The main thing is they're the primary food-producing parts of the plant. They're designed to efficiently collect sunlight and use the light energy to produce food. They convert light energy into food energy. So let's look at the parts of the leaf. Number one is the tip or the apex of the leaf. It can be pointed, rounded, indented, or other shapes. Sometimes they're flat. Number two is the midrib. That's the main vein that runs down the center of the leaf blade. And it contains xylem and phloem. And you know what xylem and phloem are, don't you? Yeah. What does xylem do?
Water going up.
Takes water up.
Yeah. All right. You guys can teach the next lesson. You know it all. And what does phloem do?
Nutrients down.
Brings nutrients down.
Yeah, so the nutrients are created in the leaf and they are loaded into the phloem there in the leaf and transported to the rest of the plant from there. There's xylem and phloem almost everywhere in a plant. Number three is veins. There are other veins that connect to the midrib. And of course, they have xylem and phloem too. So the veins are arranged in different ways, and we'll look at that a little later. In this leaf, they branch off the midrib, and it just said they move water and nutrients. The leaf blade is the broad, flat part of a leaf. It's more what we normally think of as a leaf. So that's what most of it is. And the margin is the edge of the leaf. They can be smooth, they can be toothed, like this one in the diagram is toothed. They can be lobed, they can be incised, all kinds of different, they can have hairs on them. Lots of different ways the margins of a leaf can be decorated. The petiole. Petiole is a leaf stalk, and that's actually considered part of the leaf. So the leaf is made up of the petiole and the blade. And then 7 is a bud. That's not part of the leaf. That's exterior to the leaf. The buds can grow. Some buds will grow into new leaves. Some will grow into another stem. Some will grow into a flower. Number 8 is just the stem that the leaf is growing out of, but it's not part of the leaf. So here's a leaf. So what part of it is the tip, the apex?
On the left side.
There it is. And what part's the midrib?
Xanthan.
Yep. Down the center.
There it is. And there's the veins. Veins. And the blade is just the whole thing, the whole flat part of it. And there's the margin. Where's the petiole?
It's on the right.
On the right, there's the petiole. There's no bud or stem on this one. So there's another leaf. Where's the tip or the apex of this leaf?
There's more than one.
Is there more than one tip, Steve?
That's what it looks like, doesn't it? There's one main tip in the middle on the left, and then there's two other tips. And the midrib, there's the midrib. And the veins, you can see the veins. There's one of them. But that's almost another midrib going to the other tip. And the margin on this one is not very smooth like in the last one. Let's see if we can go back. There. See, the margin on this one is completely smooth. On this one, margin is, it has some teeth in it. It's irregular, sharp teeth. And then there's the petiole, number 6. All right, now there's some different types of leaves. A leaf with only one blade on its petiole is called a simple leaf. When the blade is divided into 3 or more segments, it's a compound leaf. So that on the right is one leaf, but it has 5 leaflets. That's a compound leaf. That makes sense? So when that leaf falls off of the plant, the whole thing falls off. That whole leaf grew out of one bud.
So that's one petiole.
So it has only one petiole, Steve?
That's right. And the other little branches that go off to the leaflets, that has some other name, but I won't bother you with that. You got enough to learn.
There's more midribs.
Would they be called more midribs, Steve?
Yeah, when they're inside of the leaf blades, they're midribs. When they're in between, going from one set of compound leaves to another, it's called a rachis. It has a different name. But I didn't add that to the presentation because I thought you had enough names in your head already. Yeah, there's a real extensive section on leaves on Wikipedia, and you'll be able to learn hundreds of names if you want. So that, yeah, I'm covering the basics in this presentation, and if you want to go into more depth, you can go to Wikipedia, and there's lots more. You know, scientists like to name everything. Every little thing that's a little bit different, they'll give it a different name. So, as farmers, we like to keep things a little simpler, just what we need to learn. So, there are different types of compound leaves. The one on the left is odd pinnately compound. The pinnate refers to, there's one main midrib petiole going down the middle of it, and then there's others branching off the sides. And the odd means that there's an odd number of leaflets. There's 5 leaflets on this one. And then the one in the middle is even pinnately compound. Again, the leaflets are going off to each side of the main part of the leaf, but there's an even number of leaflets. I didn't count those, but you can count them if you want. And then the one on the right is palmately compound. The leaflets come out like the fingers of your hand come out from the palm of your hand. So it's called palmately compound. So now the patterns of veins. Veins can be organized in two main groups. Parallel veins are mostly found in monocots. None of their veins cross each other. They may look like they're fused together at the top or the bottom of the blade, but they don't cross. They're just parallel to each other. And netted veins are the other main type of vein. They're found in dicots. They connect with each other. They branch out from each other. Several smaller veins branching out from the dominant midrib. When there are several smaller veins branching out from the dominant midrib, those are pinnately veined. So it's like the pinnate compound leaf. There's a main axis down the middle, and then the others branch out to the side. And if there are several dominant veins branching from the petiole, that's palmately veined, again, like the palm of your hand. So there we see parallel veins on the left, pinnately netted and palmately netted. So let's go back to these that we saw before. So what kind of veins are on this leaf?
Palmetto.
Palmates, yes. It's got three main veins branching out from the base. See if I can go up to the other one. Then this one, oops. Sorry, this is, there we go. What kind of veins are these?
Odd nettle.
Well, pinnate.
Pinnate.
Pinnate, yeah. With veins, they don't make it odd or even. When you have a compound leaf, they can be odd or even number of leaflets. But I don't know of anybody who goes to the trouble of counting the veins in the leaf. I suppose somebody does, but I've never done it. Never even thought of doing it.
Pinnately netted.
Yeah, pinnately netted.
So there's netted, excuse me, pinnately netted. So it's one central line down the middle, and then they all branch off at one central.
Yeah, it's like a feather with one central axis and then the little parts of the feather coming off of the main one. That's the pinnate arrangement. And it's the same arrangement for pinnate veins as it is for pinnate compound leaf.
Cool.
All right, now I'm going to try and get some other leaves up here. Oh, look at this leaf. So what kind of veins are these?
Can't see it, Steve.
Oh, you can't see it. How do I get this to, I don't know how to blow it up. Oh. How about that?
No,
Can you see the veins now?
no.
Ah. Can you see light and dark stripes going the length of the leaf like this?
All we're seeing is your presentation screen.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So
Huh.
maybe sharing a different screen or possibly minimizing. Not sure.
Okay. Here we go. Now can you see the,
Yeah, there we go.
okay, good. I'll learn how to use this program by the end of the course, I'm sure. So, what kind of veins are these?
Parallel.
Yeah, that's right. And look at the margin. What's the margin look like?
Smooth.
It's smooth, yeah. There's no teeth or anything like that.
Yep.
And the tip, the apex is pointed, sort of a rounded point. And what about the base of the leaf? Sometimes the base of the leaf is heart-shaped, sometimes it tapers to a point, sometimes it's flat. What do you see here? So the base of the leaf down here.
Tapered. Is it flat? Is it shaped like a heart? It's flat.
Yeah, it sort of tapers. And then
It
it's
looks
flat
like
across the bottom.
tapered. Because it goes from wide, out in the middle of the leaf, down to narrow.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
So like that maple leaf or that pointed leaf that we showed earlier, it had a flat shape at the bottom, but it had tips out up and around. But it had a flat connection back here. So instead of having different lobes out here, it just goes out and back down.
Now, what about the petiole on this one? Let you think about that for a while, and I'll tell you this is a trick question. There isn't a petiole. The leaf is attached directly to the main stem of the plant. There's no leaf stalk. So not every leaf has a petiole. And there's a name for that. It's called sessile. But you probably only come across that in botany textbooks. But you should be aware that some leaves don't have petioles. They just come right out of the stalk. And that's often used, when it's unusual, and so it's helpful in identifying plants that have it. If you see that, then that narrows down what the plant might be. So there's another plant. Oops. Oh, well, while we're here, no, that's something else. Here we go. Anybody know what this plant is? Kind of odd looking from the top. That's maize. What kind of veins does it have?
Parallel.
Yeah. So is it a monocot or a dicot?
A monocot.
Yeah. Monocots have parallel veins. All right, let me see if I can find some other pictures here. Oh, wow.
How's that technology treating you, Steve?
I could have used another hour to prepare for this. Um, okay. How do I get back to where I was? Okay, here I am.
You gotta hold it. That's
There's too many buttons here. I don't know which one to. Yeah.
You got it, Steve. We believe in you.
Here we go. This is a basil plant. What kind of veins does this have? Can you see it?
Yeah, we can see it.
Good.
What kind of veins does it have, guys? They all come from the central, gosh, you know,
Yeah, you can see it on this one pretty well.
innately netted.
Innately netted, yes. You can't really see what the margins are. I don't know if I can- Oh yeah, blow that up. There we go. Now, oops. Oh, sideways. Anyway, now you can see what the margins. See, there's some teeth along the margins. And there's another thing here. There's these little branches coming out of the leaf where the leaf is attached to the stem. What is that where the leaf joins the stem? Do you remember that? That was way back, one of our first lessons. Last week.
I heard petiole.
Yeah, that's the petiole going from the leaf to the stem. But on the stem itself, what is it called where the leaf is attached? And then there's this gap where there's no leaves, and then there's another leaf attachment.
What? No. What is it called when things come together? At what point? What?
Did I hear node?
Node. Node, yes, they got it just before.
Node, yeah. And then the space in between the nodes?
Is the what? Internode?
Internode, yes. Okay, that's a good review. And you can almost see it down here. You can see it. There's the petiole attached to the stem here, and there's another petiole attached to the stem just opposite where it is. And that is called an opposite leaf arrangement, where two leaves will come out of the same node on opposite sides of the stem. So that's characteristic of basil. Let's see what else we've got here. Oh. Oops. There's a, this is a jade plant. You see it has opposite leaves too. There's one attached on this side of the stem, and there's another one attached on that side of the stem. I think these leaves are real thick, and that's an adaptation for a dry climate. The leaves can store water within them, and they have a very thick, waxy covering called a cuticle that helps prevent water from evaporating from the leaves. So those are both adaptations for a dry climate. Here's another one. They turn on their sides when I expand them. So what is this leaf arrangement?
Opposite?
Opposite, yes. Look at the edge of this leaf. All those sharp teeth. When the edge is like a saw like this, they're called teeth, like a sawtooth. Okay. See what else I've got here. Oh, nice. So here, we've got one leaf attached here. There's another one attached there, another one attached there. So this is not opposite, is it? So this one's called alternate leaves. One comes out from one side of the stem, then the other one comes out from a different side of the stem. The next one comes out in a different spot on the stem, instead of two leaves coming out of the same spot. So it still has nodes and internodes, but it just has one leaf coming out of each node. And it's also got these little leaf-like things here. They're not really leaves, but some plants have that kind of thing. Oh, there's another look at the jade plant. So what kind of an apex does this leaf have?
Round?
It's rounded, just maybe a very slight point on it, but mainly rounded. And the base of the leaf,
Is there a petiole or not?
there's maybe a very short petiole here. And again, it tapers down at the base towards the petiole.
So would you say there is no midrib on this one?
Say it again.
Is there a midrib on this leaf?
There is, but the leaf is so thick you can't really see it. You can't really see any of the veins.
So underneath you can see it? Maybe there's a shadow there of it? You can kind of see it?
No. Maybe, yeah. Maybe in that top leaf. Yeah, I think you're right.
So then the veins, I mean, can we see them on this? It doesn't, I guess we can't really see them. Can we see? Would we have to like cast it in the shadow to be able to see the actual vein?
Yeah.
Is that a variety of purslane? No, it's a jade plant. So
Pardon me?
it's a jade plant still, right? That was a jade plant, correct, Steve?
Yes.
So there's a question I had, I guess, or we had, was that so you can barely see the midrib. So to see the veins on it radiating, would you have to cast it into shadow, like backlight it so that you could actually see the veins?
You might be able to see it that way, or it might be just so thick that you're not going to see it.
Gotcha. But that's just because the leaves are so thick, it's storing water to protect, it's protecting itself pretty much.
Yeah, it's storing up for the dry season.
We don't know. We can't see it. So would you be able to take a guess as to how the veins might be divided on the jade plant, if we could see them? Any idea?
I would guess that it's I'm pretty sure it's netted vein. I don't think it's a monocot. But I don't know if they're pinnately veined or palmately veined? I don't know. It's a good question. Might have to dissect the leaf, cut it open to see where the veins go.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if Susan would like that. This is a plant that's growing in our bedroom. Okay, here's another.
Got a question here, Steve?
Yeah,
This information is right. Is this important for when you are identifying?
So the way we're talking about leaves, trying to identify different parts and how they're constructed, does that help when you're trying to identify a plant?
yes, it's a big help.
So could you maybe talk to us about the steps you might go through to try to identify a plant? I mean, what would you look at first and then next? Like, what might you consider, Steve?
If there's a flower on the plant, that's a big help because there's a lot of variability in the leaves, but the flowers are usually similar in plant families. Like the tomato and pepper are in the same family, and the plants look very different. The leaves are different. The pepper leaf is a single leaf, a simple leaf, and the tomato leaf is a pinnately compound leaf. But the flowers are very similar. And so that helps narrow down what you're looking at. And the shape of the, once you get to the plant family, you're narrowing in on what it is. Then the shape of the leaf is sometimes important. Sometimes whether it's the opposite leaves versus alternate leaves is very important because there are not that very many plants that have opposite leaves. And so if you see one with opposite leaves, that narrows it down quite a bit.
So it might be useful if you haven't already in the resources page, the resources document that you shared with me.
Uh-huh.
I'll share that to the class, but it'd be really useful if we could maybe have a guide to how to identify a plant using flowers.
Okay.
Is something you guys would want? Yeah.
Yeah,
So if you could find a source for that, I think that'd be a great addition to the folder.
Yeah, there are entire books, volumes and volumes of plant identification books.
Yeah.
Some are very technical. They get down to, whether there's hairs on the margins of the petals on the flower or not. And yeah.
But are there like main groups that the plants are divided in?
So are there like main groups that you could divide the plants into that would be a useful way to identify them?
Well, now you know monocot and dicot. The parallel veins is a monocot almost always. The netted veins is almost always a dicot. So that's a big, those are the first big groups that are easy to distinguish.
When you're talking about, just a question I guess I'm coming up with here. So when we talk about like plant families, Steve, like Solanaceae or cucurbits, things like that, are there telltale signs for the leaves, for example, of those plants that we might be able to look at? Something like that? Stems, leaves, flowers, things like that?
Yeah, as I said, the flowers are very characteristic. Leaves tend to be similar, like the cucurbits, the squash, cucumbers, melons, their leaves are all kind of the same type, you know, big round leaves with a long petiole. But it gets tricky with just leaves because there are other plants that have big round leaves. But that can help you narrow it down. You know, I mean, when I'm walking out to the field and I see a plant, I can usually tell if it's a squash plant or something related to that from a distance, just because of the way it grows and the size and shape of the leaf.
The palm netted leaves.
So are the palm nettled leaves, are they usually in one family, or that can spread across different groups of plants?
Um,
Palm netted, I think. Palm netted.
yeah, palmate netted. Yeah, it's often a family will have, if there's one in the family that will have palmate leaves, usually most of them do. Like maple trees mainly have palmate netted leaves. There's one species in that family that has a compound leaf that's pinnately compound, so it doesn't always hold true. But most members of the maple family have palmately netted leaves.
Cool.
Trying to think of some other example.
Cassava.
What about like a cassava plant, Steve, like the leaves or the plant of that? You're probably not super familiar.
That's not one that I'm real familiar with, I'm sorry.
What about like a palm leaf, Steve?
Yeah, so that's parallel vein, but it's like they're all radiating out from a central point. I guess there are different kinds of palm leaves. Some are like a fan, and some are more pinnate. But yeah, that's. I need to come to Curacao and look at all your plants there, so I can get some better examples.
They're offering to send pictures, Steve.
Oh, good. Yeah.
That's a nice place for a
Good place for a vacation, Steve. Sounds like you've been needing it last few days.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind getting away from here.
Yeah.
All right. So, any other questions? Okay.
I think we've covered the veins and the ribs and such.
Yeah, so on your screen is another monocot with parallel veins. That's amaryllis. Let's see what else I've got here.
You got another question, Steve?
like
Yeah.
the thorns on certain, let's say, like on the wabi. What are they? Are they like buds that go into the thorns, or not buds? Are they molds?
So we have plants down here that have a lot of thorns on them. The wabi, for example. I don't know. No, you're not familiar. But what would a thorn be on a plant? Like, does it come from a bud? Does it have its own petiole? Is it like a node and then there's internodes between the spines? I mean, could you comment on thorns?
Yeah, there are two way thorns can come from two things. They can be a modified stem, you know, a twig, or they can be a modified leaf.
Is there a significant way to tell the difference, Steve?
Well, I'm sure there is, but I don't know what it is.
We only have like 1 or 2 plants that have thorns anywhere close to the wabi back home.
Yeah.
Yeah, but rose is nothing compared to the wabi. Yeah, it is. I know that now. Yeah, a rose is not near as extreme as a wabi is.
Okay. Is it something like a honey locust?
Yeah, it's very much like a honey locust.
Oh boy.
Honey locusts are like famous back home. They're a nitrogen fixer, and they have pods. They're very much similar, but they have thorns. They can get 5 centimeters long. They can puncture tires like no problem. Like tractor tires. It's something that if you're out in a pasture mowing, you have to be conscious, like because they'll eventually fill in if you haven't worked your pasture, mowed it, grazed it, whatever. I mean, I've seen. When I was growing up, we actually had an instance where we had one of our big tractor tires, like the tractors they had here at LVV. The rear tire was punctured by just one thorn. Just flew the tire. So. Oh yeah. Jesus. Man, we hate the wabi, don't we?
Yeah. I had a similar experience, Chris. When I was on the farm down in Missouri, there were a lot of honey locust trees, and we had a guy who was going to mow, and I told him, don't mow underneath the honey locust trees, but he did anyway. And we got two or three flat tires on the tractor from that.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And then he got mad at me and quit because I told him to take the tire into town to get it fixed. Oh, well. I wasn't sad that he quit.
Yeah, usually here they take a bulldozer or a front end loader and just push it all to the side.
That sounds like a good plan.
Yeah.
Okay, we saw these leaves before. Pinnately veins, smooth margins, rounded tip, rounded base. Nice little petiole.
We have some type of, I don't know, if it's tea plant, but
Got a question?
on the
Yeah.
mark, it grows little leaves.
On the leaf itself, on the margin of the leaf.
Yeah.
So they have a jade plant that grows on the margin of the leaves. It grows miniature leaves.
Yeah.
Tolongo
Do I have one of those here? No. It's any different. One of the plants that I showed you was like that. Was that in this group? Yeah, this one.
Yeah. Do you know what plant this is, Steve?
Susan calls it Mother of Millions.
Yes, because it's grandmother, because she threw the big out.
Yeah, they call it something very similar.
Uh-huh.
Yes, it has a name.
Yeah.
Yeah, it grows little plants along the margins of the leaf, and you can break off the plants and plant them, and it goes into a new plant.
Well, we're at about 7 o'clock. Do you want to take a quick break here? I know a few people
Okay.
took the coffee, but any refills, bathroom breaks? Steve, you might need to take a moment.
Okay.
Probably take 10 minutes here, guys. All right, 10-minute break. What's the best way? So a circle on the top and take the top off. You just pull it open. Okay. I always wondered how to do this the right way. Back home, it's like it's fun, but I have to take time.
She's like an apple.
Very good.
Very hard.
It's really good. Yeah. I've done that like one time. Once. It was awesome. And I was like, well, that's like hard. Yeah, I mean, getting handfuls of it is the best. Yeah. Sometimes I wonder if crews from back home, what this weird you guys have been doing like this. Now,
That's we used to that, but something else like a berry.
yeah, it'd be like a gooseberry or a raspberries, strawberries, good strawberries, things like that.
Yeah, because I know them, it's like okay, I know them, but I didn't know them really hard. But the only thing I see is that shape of we don't see them like hairy like a strawberry.
Okay, Steve. All right, guys, here we go.
There's a couple more leaves to look at. There's a nice looking leaf. So where is the apex on this one?
Anybody? Off in the middle. Middle.
It doesn't have an apex like any of the other leaves we've looked at.
So what does that mean, Steve?
Well, it's rounded, you know, it doesn't have a point. So it's just sort of flat and rounded on the end instead of having a point. So the only way you know where the apex is because it's where the center vein goes to the edge. What kind of veins do this have?
Palmate?
Yes, good. What else? The margin has some rounded teeth on it. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Does it have a petiole?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Let's see what else we've got here. Oh boy. Here's something interesting. What do you make of this one?
The what? Compound leaves?
That's right.
Odd compound?
Yes.
Yep.
Odd pinnate. This is an interesting one because it's doubly pinnate, almost triply pinnate. There, everything you see is one leaf, it's not a stem with opposite leaves growing out of it. It's one leaf with branching, you know, the petiole branches out into, instead of into a leaflet that's in one piece, it branches out into a pinnately divided leaf. So each of what would be a leaflet, it actually has 3 leaflets on it. You see that? So this is the petiole here on the right. This is a branch off of the petiole. And this here is a little leaflet off of that branch. This is another one off of that branch, and here's a third one. So it's like there are 3 main leaflets, and each leaflet has 3 leaflets, 3 sub-leaflets on it. So here's one leaflet that's divided into 3, 1, 2, 3. Here's another leaflet that's divided into 3, 1, 2, 3. Here's another leaflet that's divided into 1, 2, 3. And then each of those sub-leaflets has 3 lobes to the leaf. So it's divided and then divided and then divided again.
Like a fractal, kind of.
Yeah, it is. That's parsley.
That's what celery is, what everyone thought it was.
Yeah.
All right. Any questions about that?
No, I think they've seen plenty of leaves at this point.
Okay.
We can go
Might want to come back to it on the next one.
Yeah, we might want to move on to the next part here, Steve.
All right. Here we go.
Uh-huh. Yeah. You never knew there was much to a leaf, huh?
So now, up to now, we've been looking at the outside of the leaves. Now we're looking at a microscopic view of the inside of the leaf, a cross section of the leaf.
What type of leaf is that, Steve?
It's just a general leaf.
So
Looks
this
like,
would be almost any leaf would be like this on the inside.
yeah, from the veins and so on, it looks like it's a dicot with pinnately veined leaves. But other than that, I don't know.
So the difference might be that some leaves have like thicker parts and some leaves have thinner parts.
That's right. And actually, the same kind of plant could have thicker or thinner leaves depending on where it's growing. If a plant is growing in the shade, it will have thinner, wider leaves. If it's growing in the full sun, the same plant will have smaller, thicker leaves.
Why might that be, Steve?
It's mainly for light interception. Let's look at the structure of this leaf, and that'll give us some idea. So we'll start at the top, and there's the cuticle, which is a waxy covering. It's not living, it's just wax that the cells secrete to protect themselves, and that keeps the leaf from drying out and helps protect it from disease organisms. And underneath the cuticle is the epidermis. It's the same kind of thing that's, we saw epidermis on the roots, and there's an epidermis on young stems, or by the time they get bigger, it's becomes the bark. But so there's an epidermis on the leaf, and that's for protection, like the skin of the leaf. And that's just one or sometimes a couple cells thick. And then there's the palisade mesophyll. It's a fancy name, but that's, they're long cells that are lined up vertically, and that's where the chlorophyll is. That's where most of the chlorophyll is. And they're lined up like that to catch out sun.
Question about what chlorophyll is, Steve.
Oh, yeah. Real good question. Chlorophyll is the green stuff in the leaves. It's what makes leaves green. And that is the molecule that captures sunlight and stores the energy from sunlight, turns that into energy that the plant can use to make sugars and other things. So their chlorophyll is like the powerhouse of the plant. That's what allows it to do photosynthesis. Are you familiar with photosynthesis? I could explain that too.
So there's a statement of sorts. Is chlorophyll similar or the same as melanin in people?
Not really. It has a structure that's very similar to hemoglobin that makes our blood red, the pigment in our blood that carries oxygen. But it's a slightly different structure, and so it's green instead of red. And it allows the plant to capture the energy from light and use that energy to make sugars. So it's a very important molecule.
Cool. That good? Awesome.
Yeah, and I can talk a little bit about photosynthesis in a while if you're interested. It's good to know about.
That'd probably be good.
That would be
Okay.
the same thing like when you have like sun, those going to catch the sun,
Solar panel.
sun panel.
Yeah. So there's the question of, it sounds comparable to a solar panel, Steve.
Yeah, that's a good comparison. The leaf is like the solar panel, and the palisade mesophyll is like the individual, I'm not sure what you call it, the little cells in the solar panel.
Yeah.
The chlorophyll is like the silicon that captures the sunlight and turns it into electricity.
I'm getting told how to eat a pomegranate, Steve. I don't know how to eat anything better.
Right.
I thought that might be rude.
He wants to protect you.
So,
Grace, it's good to know that this one you can get this taste no problem, but if you get a red cherry, Please don't eat the pigs.
No, the red colored or this color of palm?
No, this is about my own. And if you eat the pigs,
Uh-huh.
maybe you will not get to go to bedroom. Stop for a long time.
Wait, what's this called? What's it called? Peruvian cherry? What is?
Yes,
This isn't the same as like a Suriname cherry.
yes.
Yeah, yeah.
So I had a few of those.
Are you going to the private?
I'm fine. I spit the seeds out.
Okay.
I did have a couple.
It's not the same because the cinnamon cherry has a wrong fit.
Yeah.
And the Sumarumo is like a strong fit.
Okay. All right.
And that's.
You know
All right, we're off topic here.
Sounds like you're learning important things, Chris.
Actually very important for my well-being.
Survival.
Okay, all right. So
Okay.
let's talk about a few more of the pieces, and it'd be really good. I think photosynthesis is something that probably matters a lot more to what they want to use this information for. So we can talk about that after this. That'd be great.
Yeah. So, so the palisade mesophyll is the main place where photosynthesis takes place. And it's arranged on the top of the leaf. All the cells are packed in there so they can collect all the sunlight that falls on the leaf. And then there's the vein. You know what veins do. They have xylem and phloem in them. The xylem brings the water up from the roots, and the phloem takes the food, the sugars, and other things out to the rest of the plant. So here in that palisade mesophyll, that's where the plant makes the sugars and other things. And the spongy mesophyll is, there's loosely packed cells with lots of airspace in between them. And when I tell you about photosynthesis, you'll know why you need airspace in there. And then on the bottom of the leaf, there's another epidermis and another cuticle. And the stoma, you can't see it very well in this diagram. I'll see if I can find another picture of a stoma for you. The stoma is actually a hole in the leaf, and there are there's a cell on each side called the guard cells, and when those cells swell up, the hole opens, and when they get limp, the hole closes. And so that lets air in and out of the leaf. So that's the structure here. And then,
In their language, stoma means stomach, Steve.
what is that?
Stoma means stomach here.
Oh, really? Interesting.
That's the same function as the whole.
Maybe not exactly the same.
Okay, it means something like stomach. Okay, let me see if I can get you something about photosynthesis here. Oh, that's in another.
So something that I usually think about, like you guys use CMs, you're familiar with like foliar sprays, like spraying things on your plants to help them. So not just insecticides, pesticides, things like that, but like minerals, fertilizers, things like that. So when I'm applying a foliar spray, the stoma is one of the places where those minerals can enter. Yeah, they're underneath is good. If you spray on top with like a microbial solution, well, but when you spray microbes, it's more about a preventative spray in a way, because those microbes have nutrients in them, but they also spread out and take up space on the leaf. So if you spray a foliar spray with microbes in it, what you're doing is you're pre-inoculating your leaf so that negative organisms, disease organisms, can't take hold. They land and then they're overwhelmed by the sheer volume of positive microorganisms on the leaf. So doing a foliar spray, especially with microbes, is just as much about inoculating the leaf with positive biology as it is applying nutrients to your plant. Nutrients get into the leaf through the stoma. This is actually something I need to learn more about, Steve. I feel like they get in more than just the stoma, because we don't always get underneath. But
I mean, the stem is also stem, right?
right, it's what is it? So there's also stomas underneath or on the stem. So when I'm doing a foliar spray, it's more about biology in my mind, but it is a way to fertilize. It's good to get, well, you want to get both. So with your situation, you have a mister, basically, and you're getting both, because the mist goes up and down when you're spraying heavily. So if you can spray from underneath up, that's really good for fertilization. But if you're spraying EM like you do, having it land on the top of the leaf is also just as good, because you're preventing disease by inoculating with good microbes.
If you find the best,
Yeah, it's a protected area.
after
Yeah, so if you can spray underneath, that's the best. But that's always so hard to do. Unless you have a really good.
usually you should prune, and after pruning you spray. But when you prune, you take out most of the leaves, and then the only ones that are pruned are the surface is left.
It's better to do it before, because what you want to prune or fall on the leaf, so the thickness will go.
Well, it's actually, I would say, probably better to do that. Because when you prune, you're cutting the plant. You're opening a place for disease to enter. So the xylem and phloem are wide open, right? And as we know, it's the phloem are taking nutrients down. When you cut that leaf off, they're still sucking, but there's nothing feeding those phloem. So if a disease-causing microbe were to land on that phloem, it shoots straight into the blood system of the plant. So when you cut something, it's important to let it dry quickly. You don't want to let it stay moist for very long. It should dry fast so that it heals over. But if you're going to cut and then apply a beneficial microbe, that would be a good time as well, because it would take up the space. It would colonize the cut before a disease can land on it. So yeah, it lets it dry. Maybe not full sun, not like noon, but you don't want to cut it in the shade or like at night, because then it stays moist for long. So you want it to dry out not too fast, but not too fast. I mean, when we prune tomatoes back home, we do it in the afternoon. It's not the middle of the day, it's not the morning, because there's still dew on the plant. It'll take a while to dry, but in the afternoon the plant's dry, and tomatoes in that instant can take pruning. Some plants, it is plant specific sometimes, but that's a very generalized way to think about it. All right, Steve, photosynthesis.
Okay.
All right.
So, there's a chemical formula for photosynthesis, but I'll try and make it simple. Here we go. So basically, you start out with carbon dioxide and water, and with the energy from the sun, those two are combined and you get glucose, which is a sugar, and water and oxygen. So with photosynthesis, the plant is taking in carbon dioxide and it's giving off oxygen. And it's creating sugar. And so it's, sugar has energy in it. When we eat things that have sugar in them, we get energy, that's where we get our energy. And so the plant is, through photosynthesis, is turning the energy from light into the energy in sugar. It's capturing that energy from the light and storing it in the sugar. And then the plant can use that energy to do other things, to grow, for chemical reactions. Some of it puts out through its roots into the soil to feed the microorganisms. Some of it we eat, feed ourselves. So this is where most of our energy comes from. Most of the energy that we use, even things like coal and oil originated with photosynthesis. They originated with this formula: carbon dioxide and water, and the energy from the sun forming sugar and water and oxygen. And then the plant can process that sugar into other things. It can combine it with nitrogen and make proteins and DNA, all the things that the plant needs. It makes out of those simple molecules of sugar. Does that make sense? Any questions?
Huh? What's up?
Long time ago.
Marco? I'm sorry, Steve.
When you spray you, I think you say, what will happen on
Yeah. Well, Steve, there's a question. So when we apply like neem oil or fish oil on a foliar spray, what's the consequence with like the sun? If we spray it like midday, are we going to burn the plants? Do we spray it morning, evening? Is that something you'd comment on?
I have known farmers who sprayed in the middle of the day. I don't remember what they were spraying, but it did burn the plants. There were spots on the leaves where the sun burned it because of the droplets of water concentrated the sunlight and burned the leaves. So yeah, it's possible.
So yeah, like a morning spray or an evening.
Yeah, that's better. Or a cloudy day.
Yeah, the oil can help magnify. I mean, especially if you're applying like a living spray, antimicrobial spray, EM, things like that. Definitely a morning or an evening. To me, it's, well, let's see. If you're going into the evening, you're spraying and it's going to evaporate less. So the materials can stay longer. It's the same with like irrigating. If you irrigate in the evening or at night, there's way less evaporation than in like that being said, the plants, the stoma of the plants, where a lot of the nutrients enter from the foliar spray, they're open in the morning, or at night. That's where they're doing gas exchanges to help with the next day of like photosynthesis. They tend to close during the day they prevent evaporation. So if they're open during the day, they lose more water. So at the cool times of the year, if you don't have here, the stoma will be open, maybe longer into the day. Yeah. But maybe during the rainy season or at night. Probably at night because plants need gas exchange so they can keep doing photosynthesis.
Why do you say that it's not good to touch the plant at night because the plant is sleeping?
Steve, have you ever heard that it's bad to touch a plant at night because it's sleeping?
Say that again.
Sorry, I was yeah. So there's a comment, a piece of knowledge of you shouldn't touch a plant at night because it's sleeping. Can you think of any scientific backing for an ideal along those lines?
I know it's better not to go out in the field and brush the plants when there's dew on the plants, which is more likely, when the leaves are wet, which often happens at night when there's dew on the plants. And because you can spread diseases from one plant to another when there's wetness on the plant.
Because
So
the diseases would be like suspended in the water and can
Right.
more easily transfer. Right?
right.
Does that make sense?
No, well, on Curacao, what you always heard is don't touch the plants after 6 because then the photosynthesis is not there no more, so the sun went down.
Yeah.
So don't cut the plants after the sun is down because you're disturbing the plants. You have to ask them to
Mhm.
cut you.
That's right.
Okay.
So, let me structure this a little bit. So like there's a thought on the island that you shouldn't cut a plant or a leaf after 6 because the sun's down basically.
Uh-huh.
And it might disrupt photosynthesis if you do that.
I think the flow of energy would be taken place at night, right? Like what, I wanted to ask you too, what is the mechanism that drives the flow and silence?
What's the mechanism?
Yeah, like we have a heart that our bloodstream flows. What does it do?
So this triggered another question of what.
I had another question.
I mean, that's legit. This is actually something that people are still kind of asking in the, when we get to the Elaine Ingham solar biology stuff, it's a talk. So like what drives the flow of the phloem and the xylem? There's the thought of its diffusion or evaporation, but I've also heard of, Elaine Ingham's like research saying that, it moves faster than diffusion or osmosis would allow for. I mean, do you have any, can you talk on that?
Yeah. I've heard Elaine Ingham's example of that. And,
Could you maybe repeat it, Steve? Do you remember?
Yeah, the story that Elaine told me, told the class that I was in, they wanted to see, they were testing some fir trees, and there was a cave. It was very deep, down a steep cliff. There was a cave where there were some tree roots hanging down into the cave. And they wanted to know how long it would take for a dye, if they put a dye into, injected it into the tree up above, how long it would take to get down to the roots that were, 100 feet down in the ground coming out in its cave. And so one person involved in this research was down there in the cave keeping an eye on things, and Elaine and somebody else went up and they injected the dye into the tree up above, and then they were walking down to the cave to see they were expecting to get down there and wait to see when it would come, but they were just partway down the hill. And they got a phone call from the guy down in the cave saying, "You better get down here quick. It's coming out. The red dye's coming out already." And, if it was just simple diffusion, it wouldn't have moved that fast. So I don't know how it was moving, but
maybe it was trying to get it out of the
I don't think Elaine knows how it was moving.
Well, I think, even in her talks, she still says that scientifically they're not quite sure. Like,
Yeah.
They don't know exactly how fast it moves. And it's the same with the opposite way. When water's going up, it's supposedly it's just the evaporation from the leaves. It's like a straw, but there's less water up top. It leaves the leaves, so water is drawn upward through the stem. and it moves, it's supposed to be that simple, but it seems to not be that simple based on, the dye experiment. It moves way faster than the natural laws of physics would allow. So there's some sort of mechanism going on, but
What about the influence of the moon?
Yeah.
so influence of the moon potentially, Steve?
Maybe.
Maybe. I mean, we don't know. I mean, this is
Plants are more clever than we give them credit for. We don't
Yeah.
know very much. We know some of the basics, but there's a lot going on that we just don't know yet.
Very intelligent.
Another question,
another question, Steve.
let's say my vegetables, will they taste better if I cut them in the morning? Let's say I'm gonna cut my vegetables in the morning or in the afternoon, will the taste be different?
So will the taste or the nutrient quality of a vegetable be different if you cut it in the morning versus the afternoon?
Yes.
Can you talk about that?
Yes. I actually did my PhD, my master's and PhD research on something related to this. When I was in graduate school, a lot of researchers were wanting to be able to test the potato plants to see how much nitrogen they needed. Because what the farmers had been doing, this is with conventional farming, they put a lot of nitrogen fertilizer on the fields when they planted the potatoes, and they just put on lots and lots to make sure there was enough to get the potatoes through the whole growing season. And synthetic nitrogen fertilizer doesn't stay in the soil very well. It's soluble, so it washes out with the rains and so on. And so this was potentially wasteful. And they wanted to know if they could put on a small amount of nitrogen when they planted the potatoes and then test the plants partway through the growing season and see if they needed more. And if so, then they could add it then, or if they didn't need more, then they wouldn't have to, they could save the money and save the environment by not adding extra nitrogen. So they were testing meters and ways to test the nitrogen in the potato leaves to see if that would be a way that they could tell if the plant had enough nitrogen or not. But my major professor, one of his other graduate students, had done some research on beets, and he had found that the nitrate in the beets was higher in the morning than it was in the afternoon. And this was a concern because the beets were used for baby food, and babies are sensitive to getting too much nitrate. So they found that it was better to harvest the beets in the afternoon instead of in the morning because there was less nitrate. But nobody had tested potatoes for that, so that was my job. And I found that there was a difference, that if you're looking at the nitrate in the dried tissue, you harvest the leaves and you dry them, and then you look at what percentage of nitrate is in there. It's higher in the morning and lower in the afternoon. If you look at another thing that they were experimenting with is squeezing the sap out of the petiole and testing the fresh sap, because that way they could get a faster readout, and to know whether or not they needed to add more nitrogen fertilizer. And with that, it would be lower in the morning and higher in the afternoon. So what was happening is that the plant the roots are taking up water all the time, and they're taking up nitrogen all the time. But the leaves are only processing the nitrogen during the day when the sun is out, because they need a lot of energy to process the nitrogen. So they do that when they're getting the energy from the sun. So in the morning, there's a lot of nitrogen in the leaf because they've been bringing it up all night long and haven't been processing it. and then they start to process it. And by the afternoon, they've processed most of the nitrogen, and so it's much less. And I found that that's not the only thing, that at least with the fresh sap, it goes the other way, because at night it's taking up lots of water and it's not losing much water. So so the nitrate is more dilute because there's more water in the leaf. And then during the day, when the sun's out and it's hot, the plant is losing more water than it's taking up. So the leaf starts to dry out a little bit, and the nitrate gets more concentrated just because there's less water in it. So, but then there's other things that happen. So I found that if there was a thunderstorm in the middle of the day, that would affect the level of nitrogen. Because in the fresh sap, you start out with a low level of nitrogen, and it starts to go up as the leaf is drying out. Then you have a thunderstorm, the leaf gets wet again, and the nitrate is diluted. And so it's less of concentration. And then it starts to dry out again, and nitrate goes up. So there's lots of different things. If the plant is under water stress, not getting enough irrigation or whatever, then the nitrate will be higher. So yeah, so that's just one nutrient that I looked at. And it makes sense that there would be other nutrients where it would make a difference what time of day it is. And as far as the phase of the moon or the sign the moon's in, that's another story. That'll be interesting to research that, but I haven't done that.
Could you maybe talk about the bricks in the morning versus the afternoon?
Yeah.
That might be more
I would
direct.
expect the bricks to be higher in the morning higher in the afternoon when.
Maybe explain bricks first, and then.
Oh, yes, sorry.
Right.
Bricks is a measurement of the dissolved substances in a liquid. And so there's a meter. Do you have a Brix meter down there, Chris?
Yeah, I think I brought one with me. We can do some field testing with it.
Okay. A Brix meter is a way to measure how much is dissolved in the sap of a leaf or any other plant part. And so most of what's dissolved in there is sugars. And so it gives you an estimate of how much sugar is in the sap of the plant. And in the morning, when the plant is fresh, full of water, the concentration of sugar would be less because it's more diluted with more water. And then in the afternoon, it's lost more water from evaporation during the day, so the sap is going to be more concentrated. And also perhaps the plant has been making more sugars by photosynthesis all day, so that might contribute to a higher Brix level, more sugar in the afternoon than in the morning. It'd be interesting to test that and see if that's the way it actually works.
Yeah, I'll have to start busting mine out, and we'll do some tests.
Good. Let me know if I'm right.
Yeah. And the practical aspect of this is like things like lettuces that are mostly water. You tend to want to harvest in the mornings because when they run out of water, there's not a whole lot of structure left to hold them together. You know, things like a tomato or a pepper, there's a lot more structure. So if it loses some water, no big deal. It has a harder shell it can hold up. But maybe in the afternoon, it might be slightly sweeter because there's less water and more, relatively speaking, there's more sugar than water in the afternoon or in the morning. So it tends to be, at least on our farm back home, we harvest our leafy greens as early as possible. You know, chard, lettuce, arugula, anything like that. We get it as early in the morning as possible. Some people get out 5 a.m., but our students don't move that fast. But other things like our tomatoes, our peppers, our cucumbers, you know, we can wait until the afternoon. We're not worried about it. You know, we can harvest them anytime, but we actually prefer to harvest them slightly later. Well, assuming it's not that hot. We like to harvest them later in the day because it gives us time to space out our harvest, so we're not rushed to do everything at once. But also, if we make a cut or a break on the plant, the cut dries very quick. It's not staying moist in the morning dew, anything like that. That's also when we like prune and trellis our plants, because we're cutting them, we're moving them, we might break them. So we want those cuts to heal quickly. Does that make sense? So I have it's called a refractometer. It looks like a looking glass, like a telescope, basically. It's like this long. But you squeeze out some fruit sap onto one end of it, you look through, and there's a little meter of 1 through maybe like 20, 30, Steve? I don't know, something like that?
Yeah, must go up above 20.
Yeah, probably 30.
Yeah.
But it gives you an idea of the dissolved solids in the liquid you're looking at. So sometimes people will call this a Brix meter or like a sugar rating. It's a little misleading because any liquid can kind of give you a reading on this. Like motor oil would give you a reading. It tells you dissolved solids in a liquid. So it's important to keep in mind that when you're using a refractometer and putting sap on it, a lot of people will call it sugars, but it's total dissolved solids in the liquid. So the more important thing to do if you're going to use one of these for yourself is to do the readings the same way every time, so that your reading means something when you compare it to your other reading. Because maybe sometimes you squeeze this way, sometimes you use a tool to do it, sometimes it's morning, afternoon, whatever. But if you squeeze it the same way, the same amount every time, at the same time of day, then you can get a consistent reading of, oh, my carrots have a 13 right now. My last batch had a 9 at this time of the day. So they can start to tell you the nutrient quality of your plants, because it's not just sugar, it's the nutrients.
And you might get a different reading before and after you irrigate.
That's right.
So if you measure it after irrigating one time, measure it after irrigating the other time.
Does that make sense? Are there questions, comments on that? I mean, it's a super valuable way to kind of evaluate your food as you go.
Yeah. Another
Hold on. Sorry.
So you don't plant with a moon, like a moon calendar?
So you don't plant by the moon, Steve.
I do whatever I can. When Chris is not looking, then I plant by the moon.
So Steve has been following biodynamic planting. Is everyone familiar with biodynamic? It's one aspect of biodynamic planting. It's very similar to organic, but it goes further. It's more strict on what you can use and how you can use it. But one aspect of biodynamic growing is that you use the moon phases as a guide of what to plant when. So there's times to plant leafy crops, fruit crops, root crops. What's the last? Flowers?
Flowers, yeah.
Flowers. It could be a way to decide when to weed, when to prune. Yeah, so it's a way to guide your planting. Now,
that's when you look at the moon, which sign it is like.
yeah, yep.
It's the fire sign and kind of that.
That's it. That's the idea. So Steve and I have butted heads on this a few times because farming doesn't obey the cycles of the moon. Maybe it's too wet to plant on a root day. Maybe it's the perfect weather to plant your peppers, but it's a leaf day. There needs to be what we found, I think, is a balance between trying to follow the cycles of the moon, but also realizing
The cycles of the economic.
Yeah.
I mean, we got to make money.
One farmer I know who plants somebody asked him if he plants by the moon, and he said yes, but it's the last thing that I consider. If the soil is ready, if the weather's ready, if the plants are ready, then he's going to plant. And if the timing is right then that's good. But if everything's ready and the timing's not right, he's going to plant anyway. You know, if he, and the way somebody else put it is that things like thunderstorms and weddings and other responsibilities don't always follow the cycles of the moon. And so you can't always do it exactly when you would like it to do it. And so when that happens, you just do it anyway. You know, you got to get the crops in the ground.
So there's a difference, like when it's, it has a difference even on people. So
Yeah.
when it's full moon, children are more aggressive
Yeah.
than normal, and they can do well.
You can notice the difference. Exactly.
So they're pointing out that they do notice differences though. So
Yeah.
if they can notice, I'm sure we've
Yeah.
talked about it.
Yeah. Well,
And I-
there's that one, the leafy green vegetable we planted. Some were planted on the leaf day and some were planted on the flower day. And the one that was planted on the flower day, it bloomed sooner. So, yeah, I mean, we still got to harvest the leaves for a long time, but it did bloom sooner. The other one was, you know, maybe a week later bloom. So, yeah, it has an effect, but it's better to have a crop that might not be exactly ideal than to not get your crop in the ground.
I mean, as I've justified it in my mind, is that you know the moon's acting on the water in the plant. Is kind of how I think about it. You know, there's tides. There is evidence that the moon acts on the water of our world. So, yeah, I mean, I have friends in healthcare that will say that on full moon days, patients that are in rooms with no windows are just crazy. I mean, more active. Like it's noticeable.
It's actually people too.
Anyway, all right. Okay, all right. We are way off here, but maybe it is interesting. It is. Yeah. Maybe is there any more about photosynthesis you want to talk about? And that might be a way to kind of wrap up the evening, kind of tie it together somehow.
Yeah, I could contrast photosynthesis with respiration, two metabolic things. Then we could do a little bit of review of what we did last week.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Because I'm thinking we'll have a quiz on Thursday at the end of class. So it'd be good to have a little review.
Yeah, well, we can do that, or we can set it up so that we take a. Is that going to be the end of this section, Steve? Is that after the?
Yes.
So Wednesday is the last lecture, and then Thursday is the test.
Well, I was thinking I'll have a shorter lecture on Thursday, and then they can take the quiz.
Okay.
It won't be a 2-hour lecture.
Okay. All right. Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So this is the formula for photosynthesis. You start out with carbon dioxide and water and the energy from the sun, and you get glucose and water and oxygen. And here's the formula, for respiration. No, that's photosynthesis. Where's respiration? Here's respiration. So respiration is just the opposite of photosynthesis. You take the sugar, the glucose, and water and oxygen, and you get carbon dioxide and water. So that's what we do when we eat, and our metabolism processes what we eat. We give off carbon dioxide. We need to take in oxygen, and we give off carbon dioxide. And the plant takes in the carbon dioxide and gives off oxygen. And so when we eat, we take the energy out of that food, and that energy is what the plants put into the food from the energy of sunlight. So it's like the opposite process. And plants do respiration too. You know, they do the photosynthesis to create their food, but then they also burn that food for their processes of growth and metabolism, all the things that they do. So does that make sense?
So actually, the question, the plant also, let's say, exhale carbon dioxide.
So does the plant also exhale carbon dioxide?
Yes. And so
What's
it will be, let's see if I can get this right. I think it's giving off the oxygen more during the day, and it will be, it also produces carbon dioxide during the day, but it uses that up with photosynthesis. But at night, when it's not doing the photosynthesis, then it will give off carbon dioxide.
And that's because it's still metabolizing nutrients at night. It's just not doing photosynthesis at the same time.
Right, it's still growing. It's still,
So what's,
making fruits and things.
what's the percentage of carbon dioxide versus the oxygen that is used? Like 75, 35%.
So is it like, what's the ratio of oxygen produced versus carbon dioxide produced overall?
Okay, let's look at that. I think it's 1-to-1. I mean, well,
Sure.
what happens is the plant takes in the carbon dioxide and it makes the sugar out of it, and it uses some of that sugar for its own metabolism. It excretes some out into the soil, but other amounts of the sugar are used to create the structure of the plant itself. That's the building block of cellulose that makes up the structure of the plant. That's what makes the wood, that makes all of the cell walls and so on. So the plant is made out of compounds that are made out of the sugar that it produces with photosynthesis. So as much of the carbon dioxide that goes into that to make the structure of the plant, that is not given off. That's not, that's where the excess oxygen comes from. So if you burn the whole plant, then all of that carbon dioxide that was used to make that plant structure will go back into the air. But if, and it'll use up the oxygen that it gave off. But if that plant is still alive, still growing, then that carbon dioxide is out of the atmosphere, the oxygen is in the atmosphere, to the extent that the carbon dioxide was used to make the structure of the plant itself. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So we've been making some biochar down here, Steve.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So with the biochar, you've got that carbon dioxide is stored in that biochar, and you put that in the soil, and that keeps the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and keeps the oxygen in the atmosphere. So that's, yeah. Good.
So, because when we make the biochar, we're vaporizing everything aside from the carbon. So when you normally burn something, you burn everything. You have combustion, and the smoke coming off is carbon heavy. There's carbon being exhausted from it. But when we make biochar, we're not doing combustion, we're doing pyrolysis. So the carbon is not oxidizing, it's not vaporizing into the air. It's being...
You're not using, or you're extracting all the oxygen from the wood?
Well, you're extracting everything else from the wood aside from carbon, would be the better way to think about it. So when we're doing this biochar, we're not releasing carbon back to the atmosphere. We're leaving the carbon where it is, but everything else is vaporized or put back into the atmosphere. So it's if the plant were to die and decompose and stay on the soil surface or burn, that carbon would go back into the environment and be movable in the environment. But since we make it into biochar, it's a stable form of carbon. So it stays in the soil for a long time.
Which carbon is it?
I would assume carbon-8 because it's super bound up, but I don't know that. It's been a while since I took my chemistry.
Me too.
Yeah.
So if you would burn the wood completely, then you just get ashes, which is minerals. There's no carbon in it. But if you burn it partially to get the biochar or charcoal, the carbon is still there. A lot of that carbon is still there in that biochar or that charcoal.
Yeah.
And that is what you want in the step.
Yeah. So, well, when we make biochar, it's a form of carbon that the plant cannot break down. You know, fungi won't break it down. It's so stable and bound to its other carbon atoms around it that it's hard to break it apart chemically. But it has a lot of sites where nutrients can bind to it. So a different form of carbon would be compost. You know, the brown material that comes out of a composting process. I hesitate to talk about bokashi, I'm still learning, but in hot compost, we are transforming the carbon compounds and all the nutrients into different kinds of organic acids. You know, carbon bound to different nutrients, basically. And bacteria and fungi can act on that kind of carbon because the bonds are weaker, and they can dislodge the nutrients from this carbon and make it available to the plant. They can either eat it themselves and then trade that to the plant, or their actions in the soil make it mobile, make it water soluble. Steve, feel free to stop me if I'm saying something wrong here.
All right, you're doing fine.
So when we make a compost, or bokashi, we're changing the chemical arrangement of the carbon and the nutrients in that compound so that the bacteria, the fungi, the life in the soil can act upon it.
And you do that by adding oxygen to the compost, so turning it.
Well, it happens different ways. It depends on the environment you're active. So if it's an anaerobic environment, it tends to put the nutrients into a more water-soluble format, where they're very easily moved from the material by water somewhere else. When you do it in an aerobic environment, you're involving life, soil life in a different way, a different kind of soil life, so that it changes it, it binds it to minerals, carbon around it in a different way so that it's not water soluble. At least most of it's not, especially if you do it very well. So then it requires life in the soil, bacteria, fungi, all the soil food web to break it apart, because that life is eating it and either pooping it out or being eaten itself by the next thing up the food chain. So depending on, and we've been talking about this, the other mentors and I, we've been talking about the best ways to get nutrients into your farm, you know, quickly, short term, medium, long. And by using different forms of life, the bokashi, the hot compost, you know, a static compost, you can encourage different kinds of soil life, which will release nutrients over different periods of time. So the bokashi will release nutrients short term, very quickly. We can get quick nutrients into our soil fast. But the nutrients are water soluble, so they may not stay around as long as we want. But if we use a hot compost in an aerobic environment with oxygen, we create the environment where the microbes can act on those nutrients, uptake them into their bodies, multiply, and then they have a soil food web. So a food web where nutrients cycle in the soil continuously. The nutrients aren't water soluble because they are suspended in the life in the soil. They are living nutrients, basically. So then that's a bacteria and fungal activity. And then longer term is that fungi can produce acids, which will break down more complex minerals. So rocks, you know, things that are tough, you know, bacteria can break down green living things. Like you throw a green leaf into the soil, bacteria will function on that. You throw a rock into the soil, fungi are more likely to function on that. Because bacteria are more alkaline, they create a more alkaline environment. Fungi create acids, and they can break down things that are tougher, like a rock.
So basically,
And the fungi need something to eat, not just rocks.
Well, they need carbon as well, of course.
Yeah, but
But carbon is the basis of all of this, bringing it back around. Carbon's the basis. So biochar is a form of carbon that the life can't digest. It creates a home for that life. It's a place where that biology can live. The bacteria and fungi can live there very easily.
yeah, there's a very high surface area, which gives a place for the bacteria and fungi to live.
Yeah.
So basically, with the three methods, you have for the different stages of the plant, you have if you apply them at their time, they will sustain the plant better, because then you have, let's say, for the growth, you have to do actually, then for, let's say, for the blooming, then you have the one that then
Not quite. So they're asking about, would you apply these different composts at different stages in the plant's life? And I would think about it more in terms of the life of the soil, the current state of your soil. So
because the bokashi is like water soluble, so you can apply it.
yeah, the bokashi nutrients, water soluble, so the plants can access that with a very minimal involvement of soil life. They can diffuse into the roots.
Like a small plant.
Well, any plant could uptake those nutrients if it desired to do so. The non-water soluble nutrients require life, so that once they're in the soil, they don't leach out of the soil. You don't have pollution in your water. So they'll stay there. But if you don't have good biology, then they're inaccessible to the plant. So if you have, immature soil from a soil life perspective, then you would use bokashi, because you're trying to grow plants, they need nutrients. You don't have the proper soil life to cycle these nutrients. So the bokashi becomes a very quick way to get those nutrients to your plant. It's like doing a foliar feed to your plant. You're trying to apply quick, fast nutrients to help your plant out. But if you have a soil life that is very well developed, you've been applying compost for several years, you do compost teas, you apply different kinds of compost, your soil life is very balanced. If you add the bokashi to your soil, that soil life will eat it. It'll take it up and cycle those nutrients for as long as possible and trade those nutrients to your plants over the long term. So the methods, again, Steve, feel free to shout me down if you need.
Yeah.
Methods we're talking about are,
Depending on the soil.
the state of the soil. So as I've observed so far, most of your soil is pretty damn beat up and doesn't have as much life in it as it really should. So short term, we get water soluble nutrients into it. We're not going to use chemical fertilizers, but we can use organic fertilizers, such as the fermented foods from the bokashi. Those nutrients can become useful and mobile very quickly. And while we are using those to fertilize our fields, we can make the thermal compost, which has the soil life in it, in theory, that can cycle these nutrients long term.
That's kind of what I mean. But if you put, let's say, the ones that need to have a good soil life to break down the compound. If you apply it into the soil and by spraying it, you apply something that gives that life to the time that life will grow.
Yep.
At a certain point, it starts breaking down the compost you prepare that took a little time.
Well, the plant can decide when it needs certain nutrients, and it will signal the life in the soil, like, all right, you guys that can metabolize iron, I need something from you. So here's some food for you guys. Trade me iron for this sugar. So in relation to when a plant is growing, maybe it's flowering, or no, maybe it's producing fruit. It's producing a pepper and needs more calcium. So it'll signal certain life in the soil, hey, I need more calcium by putting out a specific food, and that'll increase the life, well, yeah, it'll increase that ratio, that amount of life. They'll become more active so that they metabolize more calcium from your soil and make it more available. So to kind of drive at your question
Yeah,
more.
what happens is the plant puts the food out into the soil, and the bacteria and the fungi that are there that like that kind of food, they grow and multiply based on that food, but they need other minerals to, to incorporate into their body. They're not just carbon. They also need calcium, iron, phosphorus, and all these other things. And so they go out and get all of those things from the soil. And they are better at getting it from the soil than the plant is. So they get all that from the soil, and they don't give it to the plant. They use it to make more of themselves. And so they multiply, and the population comes up. But then the other organisms in the soil, the little, the insects, the earthworms, the nematodes, the microarthropods, they come and eat those bacteria and fungi. And they get all those nutrients. But they don't need as many nutrients as they got. So they poop out all the excess. And that's in a form that the plant can eat.
Yep.
So the plant controls the whole thing. It feeds the bacteria and the fungi, and the earthworms eat the bacteria and the fungi, and the earthworm poops out the fertilizer that the plant needs. So it's the whole, that's why it's called a food web. It's not just a linear thing. It goes around in cycles, and it's much more complicated than what I've just explained, but that gives you the idea that
multiple cycles happening at once.
Yeah, and it's not just the plant feeds the bacteria feeds the plant.
I got a question, Steve. So we've been discussing, one second. So we've been discussing down here a good way to get fertility to people as quickly as possible by integrating different kinds of composting methods, basically.
Yeah.
So as we've talked about, it's bokashi is a fermentation, so it's quicker and more available, more fast. The thermal composting, it takes a month or two, and then it needs to mature. There's vermicomposting, which is another form which gives different kinds of nutrients. But then there's also the longer term composting, which would be a aerated static pile, Steve.
Yeah.
So it's like that encourages a more fungal dominated environment. So the fungus would be the long term, year, 2 years of it sitting there, maturing, be eaten by the fungus. The fungus multiplies. And then you can integrate that into your soil. Fungus hates disturbance. It doesn't grow well in disturbed soil. So when we've been making the raised beds out here, I talked about we're never going to till these again, or as little of disturbance as possible. We're not going to fuck with these. We're not going to mess with these beds. We're not going to mess with these beds as much as possible because that disturbs the food web in the soil itself. So once we make these beds, we'll leave them alone. Now, right now, they're very bacterial focused, but as we add more thermal compost, the balance will come more bacterial and fungi. As we add worm castings, that's, movable nutrients, water soluble with a lot of bacteria that are very healthy for plants. As we add that fungal dominated compost that adds the spores, the inoculants for more fungus in the soil. So by having the broad idea, and I've said this kind of idea before, is diversity is key. So by using all of these methods, we ensure as best we can that we inoculate the soil with as many different kinds of life as possible so that whatever this plant needs, it can manipulate the food web to suit its needs. We're listening to an Elaine Ingham talk today as we worked. There's what, 75,000 different kinds of microbes in like 2 grams of soil. 75 different unique varieties of life.
75,000.
Huh?
75,000.
She said 75,000 in the talk I had today.
Yeah.
Anyway,
That's like a plant.
tens of thousands, we could say very easily.
That's like a
Yeah.
forest.
It's like a forest, but even that pales in comparison.
A question.
One more question here, Steve.
So
Okay.
I prepare the dirty plant. The plant is rich with coal and all the vitamins there. How long will it stay good? Will it, let's say, next year that what will become poor?
So you're asking if we integrate everything we just talked about, all the different kinds of composts, all the biochar, all the everything.
Yes, let's say I have a rich ground with compost and
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
vitamins.
Yeah.
I prepare my stuff.
So if we give the soil all the fixins, so to speak, everything we've talked about, Steve,
Mhm.
do we ever have to do anything to it again? What will that soil keep going on by itself, or does it need something?
I think it will need continued help for at least a few years because, the circumstances that may have degraded the soil, that depleted the soil life, some of those circumstances might still be in effect. And it's going to take some time for the soil life to build up an abundance and a diversity to the point where it's going to be self-sustaining. So, we'll need to continue to give it some help.
So
There'll be benefit right away, but then, there'll be even more benefit as time goes on.
it's everything. I mean, they've been learning a lot about mulch recently, but I think the mulch could be taken to a higher level and say you need living plants in the soil at all times. Having bare soil, either unmulched or without plants in it, the food web slows down because there's nothing spurring it on. The plant's not demanding life go on. So life, at a certain point, the bottom rung runs out of nutrients, or the top, somewhere nutrients run out or cycling stop. So the best, as I've learned over time, is that having growing, living roots in the soil as much as possible is good. And then once those plants have lived, laying them on the ground as a mulch or incorporating them so that the nutrients that plant took up can then be cycled. So the roots encourage the food web, and anything that plant has taken up then goes back into the soil and is there for the next plant to grow.
So what's the effect on the rain on that? Because when it rains, it's like suddenly you see a boost in everything. Like in there, so things start to grow. Like, the rain has so much nutrients in it.
So when it rains, tend to see a flush of life.
Mhm.
I would say that's just moisture is now plentiful, and then things germinate.
Yeah.
Would be what I would say. There's
Yeah.
enough life. There's enough water for life to happen.
So if you add enough water to a bare soil, then it would have the same effect.
There's seeds in every soil. It doesn't matter where or when or how.
If you have like plants that are already planted and you give them water, so the germinate crop for your plants, you have the plants already, but give them rainwater, you see like a more, it's like they gain more.
Well, there is a difference between rainwater and municipal water, and that's something that we can get into in later sessions.
Chris, pay attention to remember if you put bumpers and stuff like that,
Oh, yeah.
It'll be different in water.
So talking about organic matter in the soil, we're way off here. We should wrap up here soon. Yeah, so last thing, and we'll wrap up. So if you add 1% more organic matter to the soil, so you like your mulch breaks down, it's integrated in the soil, it's eaten, it's the brown, dark, rich goodness of good soil. If your organic matter goes up 1% in your soil, it can hold 25,000 gallons of water more than it had per acre. So that's 93 cubic meters of water per acre. So per hectare, it's 240, I think, cubic meters of water more can be held in your soil just in the organic matter alone. So if you're adding mulch, you're incorporating organic matter, you have appropriate nutrient cycling where it's building soil, you actually increase the water holding capacity of your soil. So if you do just a little bit to increase the richness of your soil, you increase the water holding capacity a lot, like a lot.
We are talking about like 1%.
And that's 1% change.
So we can-
I would guess
I-
on the palest soil, the stuff we have here at LBV, we probably have, I don't know, 0.5, 1.5% organic matter, maybe. And it's not going to take much to start improving that. So, anyway,
Yeah,
sorry, Steve, I kind of hijacked that there.
that's good. It's all good stuff.
Okay. Do you have anything else you'd like to touch on real quick, or I think everyone's kind of ready to get out of here, Steve?
Yeah, I'll see you on Wednesday.
All right, we're good. Class dismissed. Good job, everybody. Thanks, Steve.
Bye.